the AMATS Policy Committee. It's now 1:32 p.m. And I'll walk through the roll call here. Dr. Boland. Here. Ms. Oka.
Is not online and I have not heard from her or any representative.
Mr. Colhase. Here. Mr. Cross.
Here.
If it's appropriate, I'll just take a couple minutes so that I can introduce myself to everybody. My name is Sean Holland. As of last week, I'm officially the Director of Central Region at DOT. My background is I spent a little bit over half my career at DOT. I've been gone for about 3 years. I worked across town at Dow. It was a great place to leave, but I did have the opportunity to meet the current DOT commissioner, meet some folks on his team, and I was just inspired by their vision for both the DOT and the state. And so when he offered me this position, it surprised me a little bit, but it was hard to say no. I'm really excited to be part of that team. Pretty familiar, very familiar, I would say, with AMATS. I've been working, on transportation projects for over 20 years in the city. I regularly attend both this meeting and the Technical Advisory Committee meeting. So I'm pretty much up to speed with everything that you guys have been working on. I've worked on, countless projects across the city, and they're the projects that I'm most proud of, mostly because Anchorage is my home. We've lived here for over 20 years. I kind of don't really feel like doing the math, but we have 3 grandkids that are being raised in the city. And so the success of the city and the future of the city is really important to me. I'm passionate about the community. I try to participate and stay active. And transportation is really, in my opinion, it's the foundation to build on and is necessary for their success. Central Region has somewhere around 650 people total. Out of those 600 plus people, 400 people roughly are residents in Anchorage. We got a group of real smart, hardworking professionals, and I'm just really lucky for this opportunity to be able to work with them. And likewise, with this group, I'm looking forward to working with you guys, getting to know you a little bit better and doing some things for the city. Thank you. And I believe we do have a quorum.
Yes, we do.
1, 2, 3, 4 of us. And if you could please help me out with the public involvement announcement.
Will do. AMATS committee meetings are open to the public, and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. Business items are first presented by staff or consultants. Then the committee is given an opportunity to ask questions. After the committee discusses the business item, the public is invited to formally comment. Each participant will have 3 minutes to speak on their topic. A couple of housekeeping items. If you're joining us virtually and you're not a member of the committee, please turn your camera off when you're not speaking on an item. If you're joining us by phone, to mute and unmute the microphone, press *6. And then I just wanted to take a quick moment to introduce a new member of our group, Mook Putong. Probably said it wrong, I apologize, has joined us to help out with the meeting. So she'll be taking over, helping set up the meetings, run things and everything. So welcome to the group, and we're excited to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I guess for clarity, maybe our action item, the only action item that we have is to review the memo that was prepared by staff. And is there, you think it'd be possible, or is there a desire, or is it possible to approve the plan today? Is that?
No,
Okay.
we can't approve the MTP itself. This is just approving action items for changes to the MTP based on public comment. The MTP itself, with the air quality conformity determination, will come back, we're hoping, in January for final approval.
Does anybody propose any changes to the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Thank you.
Got it. Thanks.
And, you'll suffer through my first few meetings. I'm new to Robert's rules, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm YouTube trained, but I can get, but a second.
Second.
Okay, thanks. Are there any objections to adopting the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. The next item on the list is to approve the meeting minutes from September 28th, 2023.
Move to approve the meeting minutes from September 8th to 28th, 2023.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Colhase, seconded by Dr. Boland. Are there any changes or discussion on the minutes? None. Any objections to approving the minutes? Hearing none, September 28th, 2023 minutes are approved. Let the record show that Ms. Buchan has arrived, and the time is 1:38. Approve the minutes. The next item on the agenda is the action items, and that's the draft 2050 MTP public comment memo prepared by staff. Is there anything you need to do to warm us up on that, Aaron?
It'll actually be Chelsea Ward-Waller as the project manager who'll be leading us through this one. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. So today we're looking at a summary level review of the comments. You have a packet in front of you that has all 81 pages of. So we're not going to be going through each one of those 1,244 comments. But based on those comments, we put together sort of the highest priority, again, from the commenters, not from staff's perspective, but as a summary from the comments that we received, the highest priority additions, removals, and changes in the document. And those additions and removals are specific to the project list. And you can see as well in the memo that was prepared, comments in bold were supported. And what we're asking for today is just based on these high-level summary additions and removals to the project list and changes both to the project list and the overall document. Do you agree or disagree or have a change that you'd like us to make in the MTP document that again will be brought back to this group in a final form in a couple months once we're able to make those changes? So you're not approving the MTP today. You're just helping us understand what changes you want to see in the next version of it. So the draft went out for public comment for 60 days in August and September and a little bit of October. And this is what we heard from the public.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
I guess I have a question for Ms. Ward-Waller. So I may have missed part of what you said. So everything in bold in here has been added?
Sorry, everything in bold in the memo
Okay,
was something that the technical advisory committee supported.
That's okay. Go to the next slide. Yeah, that one right there.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate that.
And I do have Excel documents pulled up that we could switch to screen share if you wanted to dive back into some of the conversation around the comments in more detail that we did at the work session on October 30th. If that's helpful in any way. But again, this is really the summary of that conversation, this memo.
Was there any threshold to the number of comments that you used to bring these topics onto the memo? I mean, one comment probably didn't do it. Was it a minimum of 5 or?
It was different for each one. So we could dive into the worksheet. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but there was a clear cutoff for each one as well. So I think for the changes, for example, if I'm remembering correctly, there were like 31 comments for number 1 and number 2 that are listed under the changes on the memo. And then the next one was like 3 comments.
And I guess point of information. public comments, then further discussion on this from policy committee.
Yes, correct. Right now, it's just the question stage for the committees. Then we go to the public and allow them to provide their comments. Then we come back for action, changes, approvals, whatever the committee wants to do.
And I guess one other thing that I wanted to add, and hopefully this won't make it even more confusing, but if there's something not in this list that you also want us to change in the MTP, right now we're looking for any changes you want in the draft MTP before we come back to you with the final. So these are the changes that are proposed based on the public comment. The MTP leading up to the public comment period was based on a lot of additional public comment periods. We had public comment specifically for the goals and objectives. We had public comment specific to the project nominations and the scoring criteria. So there was a lot of other public comment before this public comment. And now we're really hoping to finalize the document. So whatever else you'd like us to see before we finalize it.
Member Cross has his hand up.
Yeah, thank
Question.
you. So, thank you. And I guess my question is, project number one, the Glen Highway Pathway Settlers Drive to Connect River Bridge. Now that's a massive project at 21 million, and we understand that's a very large, endeavor. But there's like a smaller sections of that, and I'm curious how some of these larger projects get fractionalized because, there's a section from Mirror Lake Middle School, which has no bike trail, and that's a middle school with no trail access out to even the surrounding community. There's no bike trail. That's part of that larger project, right? So like a half a mile section of trail that was never built between Thunderbird Falls, the surrounding communities, and the middle school. But that's a small section of this larger project, but you could probably just knock out 5% of that project or less, and it would resolve 90% of the issues around this larger. How do we separate smaller things within a larger project that actually affect the greatest amount of change? I'm just curious because the Mirror Lake Middle School not being connected to Thunderbird Falls and technically being a middle school with no bike trail access at all, is part of that bigger project, but how do I work that in? Thank you.
I think, you could either revise this project. You could, rather than adding this large project that has 20 million, you could revise it to be just that small project, or you could recommend, as a policy committee, you could recommend to add a new project that's just that segment. I think those would be two ways to go, but that can definitely be an action that you all take today if that's desired.
Okay, thank you.
And again, Sean Holland, again, for clarity, if we add a project, we're fiscally constrained, so we have to drop a project within the same funding group.
Correct, yes.
Are any other questions or comments from the committee? Hearing none. Do we have any comments from the public? And I'll remind the public that they have 3 minutes to speak on each action item.
Online.
Online. We'll take Mr. Will there. I can't quite see your name, but your hand is raised.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, Will Tagan here. I was at the previous meeting. I also have some written comments if you guys see it in the memo, and it's basically the issue that Kevin spoke to. We have been working, in addition to being the executive director of Chugach Mountain Bike Riders, which advocates for non-motorized trails and pathways here in Chugach Eagle River. I'm also a member of the Chugach Community Council and appointed to the Parks and Recreation Board. So I'm pretty involved with the plans out here. There was a lot of outrage in Chugach Eagle River to the lack of projects in our geographical area. And people were quite angry. So we think it's very reasonable to add in a few projects. I'm quite in support of what the advisory committee has recommended, specifically adding the Artillery Road interchange with the Glen Highway Pathway connection. That is a great recommendation. I know that's a huge priority of Subursa. Also, the clarification down on the memo of number 1, Eagle Road rehabilitation. I know Assemblymember Cross lives back in this neighborhood. The road is going to be rebuilt. There is an adjacent non-motorized plan to specifically include a separated multi-use pathway on that project. That is something the community has been asking for a decade. So just to clarify that, to ensure that is done in the project, we really recommend change 1. We recommend addition number 2. And then as Kevin, as Assemblymember Cross said, project 1 has already been funded by the legislature to the tune of $300,000 through a CAPSIS request. Stakeholder engagement has already begun on that project. I don't know if people realize that that is underway right now. And so we are asking to reduce the scope of that project from going all the way to Connect River Bridge, just to connect to the existing trail. There is, you may not know, but there is an existing bike path that is not connected between Thunderbird Falls and Eklutna Lake Drive. We're asking that that be extended to the south. It's a half mile of the shoulder of the Glen Highway. And there's the old Glen in that section was shut down and paved over. So there is no secondary road. There's no frontage road. There's no neighborhood road for that community. There is no access except for the Glen Highway. And I think we need to connect our northernmost neighborhood to the rest of the city for non-motorized access. So with that, I highly encourage those 3 projects to be included. I believe the smaller scope of the Glen Highway pathway could be easily included with the size, with the dollar amount. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Diana Rhodes with the Anchorage Park Foundation. I'm so sorry I can't hear anything for some reason. I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
I can't hear anyone either.
Okay, somehow the sound isn't working for us to hear, but sounds like you can hear me. But Anchorage Park Foundation has a contract, as Will has mentioned, with R&M to do a study of the building the Glen Highway Trail as part of the Alaska Long Trail. We received $300,000 and we have signed a contract with R&M to get the project going. We have to report back to them in the next 2 years on that project. And so we then would immediately want to be moving forward in how we can get this pathway built along the highway. And we focused particularly in this section, if there was a need to reduce it in some way. I mean, we want to do that connection from Mirror Lake to the native village of Eklutna. There's a lot of exciting things happening at this time with the native village of Eklutna. And so if we needed to reduce this down, that would be where to go. But our signed contract with R&M is looking at the best route between Anchorage and Palmer. So looking at the route, but there is that specific section, which is the highest priority. So thank you. Thank you for your consideration. We also wondered, and we did not put it in in our comments, but wayfinding was another project that we received $800,000 from the Alaska legislature and the governor. It was signed, and we have worked closely with the municipality of Anchorage on wayfinding throughout the Moose Loop and on our trail connections. But we are hoping that, and I apologize that I don't know this, but is there anything in the MTP 2050 that speaks to wayfinding? Because we hope there is. If there's even a word or two that you could put into this plan about wayfinding, because we have a lot of more work that we need to do on that $800,000 contract for the Glen Highway Trail and downtown and connectivity for our parks and trails. And just want to remind folks that Outside Magazine listed Anchorage as one of the 25 happiest places to live in their latest magazine. And it was largely due to our parks and trails and all these pathways that we're working on in the MTP 2050. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the comments, Ms. Rhodes. Anybody have any questions or responses for Ms. Rhodes?
If I may, there is wayfinding included. NMO 354 is for wayfinding, and then there's also NMO 364 for a wayfinding study. So one is a study and the other is implementation.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else? No, I'm not seeing any more.
Oh, there's one.
One more. Oh, sorry. Please state your name.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm Jeff Vanis with Eagle River Parks and Recreation. Excuse me, I'm here today partially just because I've been getting a lot of comments over the last few weeks about the inclusion of non-motorized trails in the MTP. And I maybe just to emphasize Mr. Cross's and Mr. Tagan's comment, I'll just add that we are initiating a new master plan, park master plan for Edmonds Lake and Merritt Lake. And one of the issues that we know is going to be a big part of that plan is the connectivity of that park, both to the middle school and to the Thunderbird Falls neighborhood, which is all the same corridor. So there clearly is a lot of concern in the community about the kind of the connectivity through that whole section of the road system there.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Brand? Okay, now I think that's the last public comment. Appreciate those. What is the will of the committee?
So I'd like to move Volin Amendment 1 as recommendations to changes to the 2050 MTP.
Sorry, you have to do a main motion first, then you can amend.
Oh,
The
so
regular.
the main motion then to approve the MTP? Because we can't.
No, it'd be to approve the changes in the memo. However you kind of want to phrase it. It's not approving the
I don't
MTP
wanna
itself, it's the
approve
changes.
in the memo.
So you'll have to do a main motion. You don't have to do an amendment. Typically, you can
So
call
you
it
want
just
this
a
to be
main
called Volin
motion.
motion.
Yeah.
Okay, Volin main motion 1, 2050 MTP. And if I could get a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Ken. And if I could speak to the motion, so the changes that I would like to see then incorporated in the 2050 MTP. Number 1, I would like to amend the project description for HIP NHS 1, which is the Diamond to O'Malley project. I would like to see the project description changed so that it would read pedestrian over and or under crossing at Scooter and 92nd. Construction of a non-motorized overpass or underpass to connect 92nd Avenue west of the Seward Highway with Academy Drive east of the Seward Highway. And I would like to see the associated funding reduced from $105 million to $30 million. And I'm basing that on a presentation that we heard on some concept alternatives that I think were sort of thrown together. That presentation was delivered by Christina Huber to the AMAPS Policy Committee on 11/17, and you'll see those concept alternatives in Exhibit A attached to the amendment document. I chose 30 million because that would cover concept number 2, which was the most expensive. So that's change number 1. And I'm basing, I'll just say I was, I think a little disheartened to see the technical advisory committee recommendations come forward and not be, I think, fully responsive to the public comments that were received, particular to this project. And I want to talk about that really briefly before I move on in describing the motion. There were 0 comments in support of the O'Malley to Diamond Seward Reconstruction Project. There were 10 comments against. It scored very low when run through the MTP scoring process at 35.35. The Assembly has passed 4 resolutions to either right size, reevaluate, or cancel outright this project. The Rabbit Creek Community Council wrote a letter to Alaska legislators on this project, expressing that they are concerned about it. And they say they have repeatedly voted that the full interchange at 92nd Avenue is no longer justified by traffic or use patterns in the area. We urge you to deauthorize this project as proposed and request a redesign with a non-motorized underpass to connect Academy Drive and 92nd to better and more safely serve the community. They also made recommendations on the STIP, and they commented on that project as well. RCCC has been on record for several years in opposition to STIP project ID number 30691, the Seward Highway O'Malley to Diamond reconstruction as proposed. That freeway project is a poster child for misguided spending that goes against Anchorage's goals for safety and reduced dependency on vehicular travel. The proposed freeway expansion is no longer justified by population growth or travel demand. The on-off ramp at 92nd Avenue would channel high-speed traffic through low-income neighborhoods and would not deliver safe and appealing non-motorized travel options. Again, the Rabbit Creek Community Council submitted comments on the TIP, wherein they said that this project, NHS 0004, 92nd Avenue Interchange and Seward Highway, O'Malley to Diamond Boulevard reconstruction with a full interchange at 92nd Avenue is no longer justified by traffic or use patterns in the area, etc. Cabot Loop Community Council in May passed a resolution 9-0 in support of an assembly resolution regarding the Seward Highway Rabbit Creek to Diamond Boulevard reconstruction project. They asked that it be reevaluated and that they supported Anchorage Assembly Resolution 2023-54 and request that the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities halt any additional work on. And to my understanding, they have not. So that's number 1. I hope it's a compromise to keep the program or to keep the project programmed on the TIP rather than canceled outright, but with a reduced amount in an amended project description. Number 2 of my motion is I would like to program the Artillery Road interchange at its full amount at $32.8 million. Although it also scored low, unlike the O'Malley to Diamond project, the MTP received many comments in support, 27 to be exact, of this project. And additionally, we heard from the MOA traffic director that he felt that there was a need to address traffic safety in the area. Number 3, I would like to also program the Glen Highway pathway connection at Artillery Road that would be associated with that project, $1 million. Additionally, I would like to add a reconnaissance study for Turnagain Street to evaluate options for potential complete streets improvements and program that funding at $800,000. And because we are fiscally constrained with the remainder of that money, I would like to increase the program funding for both the Ingress Street and Gamble Street rehabilitations. I would like to increase both of those projects by $20.2 million to bring the total for each up to $42.5 million. For me, Ingra and Gamble and the corridor and all the studying that we're doing with the ongoing Pell process and the Reconnecting Fairview project is the priority. My colleagues have unanimously supported that in assembly resolutions on the MTP and the STIP. Although those projects are currently programmed, I think really what we need to do is come up with a realistic amount. And I think that the increases that I'm proposing get us closer to that. We don't know what the preferred alternatives will be. Those should be coming before us in spring of 2024. But in the past, when this corridor has been studied, we've seen everything from losing a lane to doing a cut and cover, which would be very expensive. So what I would like to see here is a realistic programmed amount that could capture a range of preferred alternatives once the Pell and Reconnecting Fairview projects are completed. So with that, I urge the support of the policy committee in adopting these recommendations.
This is what I think happens next. I think we've discussed these items in the amendment and whether or not they should be made to the memo. And we should probably address each of these one at a time.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, point of order. Mr. Bowen, are you making these as one amendment?
I'm making an omnibus motion, yes, main motion. And then I guess the policy committee could choose to amend this motion.
Yeah.
You can make your own amendment to your main motion. You can make an amendment, but all of these, the 1 through 6,
All of these are part of my motion.
included in one amendment.
Correct.
So
So you will need a second.
you'll have to vote on the motion as given, which is all of them at once. Unless you do an amendment to,
Individual amendments.
yeah.
Well, I think Aaron's preference, if I'm not mistaken, I have it listed here on amendment because my thought process was we
Right.
were recommending an amendment to the MTP. However, I'm happy to call this a main motion as an omnibus where I'm recommending the list of changes all at once. And then other members of the policy committee, if they so choose, could amend this motion.
An amendment. Amend.
No, the main motion is what he stated. There is no other motion on the floor. His motion is
He
to
titled it amendment because he thought it was going to be to something else, but it's actually just a.
just the main motion.
Move to approve the changes to the MTP.
No,
Nobody
Oh.
moved to do anything with the TAC document. The only motion that's on the floor, the only motion that has been made so far
These changes.
is this list of recommended changes to the MTP.
so he called it his motion and then it was seconded and then went through what the changes were. I think typically what happens is when you make a motion, you explain all of the changes that you want, then somebody seconds it. So it seems like it was an amendment, but it was not. It was the main motion as he was just explaining.
Yes, I thought it needed a second for purposes of discussion, so I seconded it. So then Mr. Boland explained it, so.
Have discussion before we.
No,
No. It's typically what you do is you make the motion, get somebody to second it, then you have discussion because that's when you can do friendly amendments or amendments or things like that. If you do discussion beforehand, that doesn't count as part of the motion, changing all that kind of stuff. So it's motion, second, then discussion.
Feeling a little bit helpless.
Yeah, no, don't worry. It's a lot. I understand.
So
we're on track.
I know.
We're on track with where we should be. Motion was made and seconded, and then discussion was opened up. And now, I guess, of course, the other members could either debate the merits of these things, decide either for or against, or they could make proposed changes via amendment.
Yeah, right. Maybe we are where I thought we were.
You're exactly where we need to be.
Assemblyman Cross, please.
Yeah, I just support Volan's motion. Obviously, just to reiterate the multiple conversations we had, and I will tell you, even though District 2 and Chugach Eagle River is far away from the scooter 92nd Avenue, we've been scratching our head for some time, and over the usefulness of and the size and scope of that project and why it hasn't been focused more on a pedestrian access. But, so I support it. I think it's about time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a few questions and comments, I guess. Now for Mr. Volan, I guess perhaps Mr. Holman could help answer this too, but the cost reduction, the savings that you're proposing to realize from eliminating the vehicle underpass and just going to a pedestrian underpass or overpass. My understanding was that the O'Malley to Diamond project was reconstructing the Seward Highway from O'Malley to Diamond. And I'm wondering if the remaining funding is sufficient for that scope of work. I think the project was around $105 or $110 million, 105 maybe. You reduced it, you're proposing to reduce it to 30. Is that enough? You know, Mr. Holland, is that enough to do the scope of the project, O'Malley to Diamond? There was some resurfacing, some lane additions without the vehicle underpass.
Maybe I think I'm missing the intent. The intent is to de-scope that project and for just the underpass for 30 million.
To de-scope the current O'Malley to Diamond project is reconstructing the Seward Highway from O'Malley to Diamond, building the 92nd Avenue underpass with associated roundabouts, I believe. If the project is de-scoped or the funding is reduced to $30 million, is there sufficient funding to do the work on the Seward Highway that needs to be done without realizing that the underpass is now removed? So there was other work envisioned in the O'Malley to Diamond project than just the underpass. Is $30 million enough to do a pedestrian underpass or overpass and the other work that was envisioned for that section of Seward Highway?
So I'd love to respond if that's okay. At that presentation that's referenced in Exhibit A attached to this, if you look at concept number 1, that's sort of, I guess, the least expensive at $18 million of estimated cost. However, before these 3 slides were shown in succession, Ms. Hoover did put up a slide, and this is all on recording from that November 2022 meeting. And she said that there's a baseline assumption that at 8 million, maybe I should have included this slide too, that would include the expansion, the 2 additional lanes. And so my understanding is that all 3 of these concepts include the funding of the additional lanes. They don't include the divergent diamond aspect. And so, yeah, I just think that this is consistent both with the concept alternatives that we were shown. And again, I chose the higher end of that, which I think, DOT has expressed maybe an interest in doing some sort of phased approach undercrossing. So by choosing the most expensive concept alternative here, I guess, for me, it's a compromise. I will just say, Kent, as you're well aware, the municipality is doing snow maintenance on DOT road. Okay. And so I almost feel like I'm living in an alternate reality right now, that this project that's so unpopular and has such a little support in the community would add lanes that need to be maintained. So again, for me, this is a compromise, and it's based on the only presentation that even had partial to good information on what it would look like to right size this project. And that's what I'm working off of, because I don't feel like we've received good information from DOT on what it would truly would take. And I think even these concept alternatives that were presented to us at that November meeting were hastily thrown together in a matter of days. But I'm trying to, in good faith, allow this project to stay programmed in a way that would more closely align with the community's expressed needs.
And I'm not sure when I get into it, but I think maybe I hand the gavel over to my the vice chair there here. But there's two things, I guess, that I feel like if you descope the project that much so that we're just talking about that pedestrian undercross, we're talking about a completely different project. So it's almost like we would take the O'Malley to Diamond project out of the MTP and add a new project because the scope, the purpose need, and all those things are completely different. I don't think it's really changing the project description. I think it's creating a new project. As far as, some talking points that the DOT has for that Seward Highway O'Malley to Diamond is, the purpose and need is summarized as to provide additional capacity, connectivity, and safety enhancement. So what I've talked to staff about is that we should go back and reevaluate that purpose and need. We'll use the most current AMAX model to see if it still, supports that projected traffic growth, and reevaluate the scope of the projects, how those improvements might be phased. And for instance, are those additional lanes warranted? They may not be warranted by congestion with that reevaluation. There's safety enhancement there that allows a longer distance for cars to weave parallel, which is safer than the typical ramps there. The interchange improvements, that's a big part of that $105 million. And we need to take a look at is that really warranted? Is it still the right interchange type? And I think at the workshop, I brought up that anecdotally, there appears to be a crash problem there. Our data lags by three years. That's just the way the system works. And it turns out that it's not a big problem compared to a lot of other intersections or interchanges in the city. But we do have a crash problem a pedestrian crash problem on Diamond, which is also included in the scope of this project. The other thing that I wanted to take a look at, or it's staff's idea, the other thing that we wanted to take a look at was what's the appropriate thing to do at Schuylkill, whether it's to make that connection or make a pedestrian undercrossing. Some of the elements that I thought might appeal to some of the comments that I saw is that the scope of the project includes bike lane and pathway added to Brayton along the east side for the length of that. Right now, we're showing some roundabouts in there, which adds traffic calming, which I understand that's a problem on Brayton. There's also a separated pathway on the east side of the Seward Highway. And I mentioned that there's pedestrian enhancements at the ramps in Diamond, where there is a demonstrated crash history. And then another thing that it includes that's pretty important in the city is the creation of a new snow dump. So anyway, to summarize all that is that we do plan to go back to the drawing board with more recent data just to see what parts of that scope are still warranted and needed, and maybe descope the project from there. As part of this exercise, we're willing to descope that some and maybe move some of that funding towards that Glen Highway to Artillery interchange. Yeah, so I think that covers kind of number one and number two. Number three, again, I think that's the Glen Highway pathway connection to that Artillery Road for $1 million. I think we could support that as long as we could find funding for it. Number four, I think the DOT would probably defer to the city. That's the Jernigan Street reconnaissance study. And again, as long as we can find funding for it. The increases to the program funding for both of those Ingra and Gamble projects, it seems a little arbitrary. It's hard in my mind to just add $20 million to that scope of not knowing exactly what we're gonna do. All these costs are concept level, so the accuracy is, who knows what the accuracy is. We've seen 40 to 50% inflation compounded over the last 3 or 4 years. It's probably going to drop off, but I'm not sure how accurate any of these things is. I mean, it's important to have it fiscally constrained probably, but it is a plan. It's not a funding program. Anyway, so that's my input from the DOT's behalf.
So can I ask you a follow-up question?
Please.
Why, what is your recommendation as first mover and 92nd? If that's, it's the purpose of day.
Yeah.
So that AMAT staff has their marketing plans.
Sure.
It sounds like you are acknowledging that the purpose of need needs to be reevaluated and the scope needs to be changed. But I'm not hearing an amount from you.
Yeah.
And why would we, if you think it's more appropriate to remove that project and add another, I mean, is that the recommendation that you're making in
No.
this?
Nope. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
And also, okay, so that's not the recommendation. Is your recommendation then that we would keep it fully programmed at $105 million on the MTP?
So my recommendation is that we'll go back. So right now it's programmed for, my memory is 42-ish million. We're already planning on phasing it in the, in our project development plan, which kind of leads to the eventual STIP. So we're already planning on breaking it up into phases because we can't afford that $105 million hit in our spending plan. So I feel like 40 million is a good number to use. And I guess I wouldn't, at this point, I don't want to make the decision on how we're going to de-scope that. But I think we need to go through that analysis.
I am uncomfortable keeping that programmed on our long-range transportation. What that project hopes to accomplish. And so I think with your feedback, that makes me more inclined to just cancel the project and require DOT to bring back a reevaluated project and a reevaluated scope. So that's just my 2 cents. I mean, I'm willing to keep my recommendation here for 30 million. But I guess that gives me even more of a lack of clarity where DOT is headed. This is a planning document and not a funding document. But we need to have a plan. And I think the description needs to match up with what that plan is. But yeah, I guess that's my.
I guess, and again, sorry if I'm out of order at all, but from the scope that's in the MTP, it's not all that detailed. And I think the things that I mentioned here, bike lanes and the pathways and the traffic calming on Brayton, to me, when I'm reading through that project description, it's not very clear. But some of those things, if it was clear in there, I feel like it would have appeased some of the concerns that some of those commenters had, that because it does have non-motorized facilities and it is going to make the frontage road safer, going to make travel on the ramps to on Diamond, where there is a demonstrated crash problem. There's some channelization and things like that is going to solve those problems. So yeah, I guess the DOT's opinion is that we should keep that in the MTP, recognizing that there's potential for, like I said, maybe we don't need, at this point, I'm not going to commit to anything, but we may not need those extra lanes on the Seward Highway or something like that. So I feel like there's potential there to de-scope that some, come up with maybe a less expensive alternative at the interchange. Some things that could free up some money. We already have a plan to phase that project. So, but there's no real phase. There's no clear definition of those phases yet. I think it's programmed for like 27 now, so it's a little ways out.
Where has that phased approach documentation been publicly available?
It's in the to be draft steps. So is it publicly available? I think it's probably a development that, keep in mind, it's my second week, but I think it's the development probably that's come about in the last month.
So it's not publicly available.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think so, because the draft STIP has been published, but not final STIP.
Clarification on that point.
I can't speak to the specific numbers. but-
State your name.
Luke Willen, DOT, pre-construction engineer. The draft SIP that was released for public comment did show a phased approach to this project. There were some inconsistencies in the numbers of where the phasing was going to be within the documents that were put out for public review. But part of the guidance within the SIP was to limit projects to $50 million or less. And that was part of the front matter of the SIP.
Jim, here, I'm not sure I have enough. Were you done?
Do you want to get it back, Court?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Good thing that one.
I'm not sure I have a question or a comment or exactly. I did hear you say, Mr. Holland, that DOT is, I believe, interested in looking at reevaluating the project and what the scope of that project may look like. I know that Mr. Boland articulated it, and I've heard this since the 2018, 19, or 20 timeframe, that there's a lot of interest in the community in eliminating the vehicle underpass. And I think that's the intent behind Mr. Boland's amendment or his motion clearly. What's unclear to me is how the position you articulated now about reevaluating the project, when that, if that level of reevaluation would occur, if we were to leave the funding at 40 million, which I thought I heard you propose. How is there assurance to the mover that that reevaluation would occur? I heard you say that, and this is strange because you're in the position of defending the project or representing the project rather, and being on the body at the same time. But you do have some, at least Mr. Bollinger can help with that. You talked about evaluating whether the additional lanes are needed, but it sounded like that position would continue to be that the underpass would still be needed. And the reason behind, one of the primary reasons behind Mr. Boland's motion is, I think, to eliminate the underpass in response to neighborhood and community council comments. So I'm a little unclear how we reconcile that. So I'll stop there, and then I have a question for Mr. Young and Ellen.
Yes, so don't know that I have a good answer for that. I think that we do definitely need to consider. I mean, we've done a similar project to the north of that, right at Lower, I believe. So maybe that comes into part of that reevaluation. But I guess it's hard for me to give any assurances. That probably does have some value as far as connecting the communities across the highway. But I don't know. It's hard for me to provide any assurances other than we'll take a look at it and we'll consider public input. We definitely know that that's where pushback is. And sorry, I don't have a better answer. Please.
Do you have a rough sense of timing for when that reevaluation would occur?
Well, we're not programmed for construction until 27, so we've got a little bit of time to figure that out.
So
But
presumably before 27.
yes, yeah. But yeah, I would say that reevaluating the environmental document is required in the federal process at different milestones anyway, and we still have at least one more of those milestones to hit. If the document gets to a certain age, they have to be reevaluated as we move to construction, utility relocations, those things. We need to reevaluate the document as a requirement. But yes, the project's been around long enough that I think we need to step back and see if some of the traffic projections that were made based on the old AMAX model are still accurate. And, if those change, then maybe that need for the undercrossing 92nd goes away. But at this point, we don't know those numbers. The timeline, we've started to work on it already.
May I ask a question, Mr. Young?
Please.
I guess a procedural question, two procedural questions. One is there another opportunity in future years to amend the MTD?
Yes, there is.
Next question is, do we need to act on this motion today? Is there a time window we're facing?
So for us, yes, there is, because we as staff need to know what changes or removals, additions, removals, and changes you want done to the MTP. So we can do that in December, because that'll take modeling, making sure the fiscal analysis is done, making sure the air quality conformity determination is up to date before we can bring it back to you in January. The reason our timeline is so crunched, because we have until August of next year, but we're pushing forward, is because the STIP can't be approved until the MTP is approved. Because of the projects shown in the STIP also need to be in the MTP and the TIP. And so there was an effort by AMATS to try and help the state get the STIP approved before their extension period ends at the end of March. However, we are doing our best. If the committees feel that more time is needed for discussions on these items, we can always push back MTP work until the committee is satisfied that they have all the answers they need. Just recognize we still do need to get our MTP approved by FHWA and FTA by August of 2024. So, you know, we can push it back if need be, but we do have a time limit we still need to adhere to. And then Chelsea can help with anything I missed.
And I was just gonna add, in addition to being able to do amendments to the MTP in the future, once the MTP is approved, the MTP also gets updated wholly every 4 years. So there's also that timeline to think about.
So we are working with several fiscally constrained plans. You know, I guess in my world, the STIP is probably the most important, you know, and we're over programmed now. So we do have to prioritize those projects. I'm not sure that with all the other elephants that we're trying to eat there, that how high this raises, you know, but I guess the question about the MTP is that, again, a lot of these numbers are conceptual. It doesn't get changed every time there's a change to the estimate. Is that right? Or
it depends on how significant of a change. You know, if it's significant enough that there could be an impact to other projects not being funded, then yes, we do have to do a reevaluation of the funding. But because we're always updating the MTP, there is never a time when we're not updating the MTP. We always relook at these estimates. But if we know, for example, that this project is not going to be 105 million, but instead will be 30 million, that's a significant enough change for us to go back, because then it would free up funding for other projects that weren't added in. Because, you know, we identified all these needs, but we couldn't fund them because of the cost. So that's a pretty wholesale. If it's like a $2 million change, that kind of washes out in the end.
And I guess I asked that question leading into Ingrid. Definitely some needs over at Ingrid and Gamble. There's several projects in the MTP already. If we go through that analysis and discover that that's a $40 million project, I mean, we have that flexibility too. It's a living document.
Yeah, we can do an amendment, or the next update we do, we'll be looking at the fiscal analysis to be like, okay, where are we at? Are the projects still moving forward as we said they were when it was approved last time? Do we make adjustments and changes? It's kind of a never ending process for us. And also just want to clarify, we also have to update the TIP for things if there are projects in the MTP that also are in the TIP in order for it to be in the STIP. So if this project is also in the TIP, we have to update it with whatever is changed in the MTP. And because we have actual numbers on these projects, because they're underway, we have to keep them consistent with the actual numbers that are known at the time.
So I think I'll just make one final appeal. And just say, you know, I appreciate that the department is looking at how they can rescope the project. But, and I also appreciate hearing that there is opportunity in the future to amend. But I think the onus is on DOT to rescope the project and then bring forward that amendment when it's ready. I don't think I feel comfortable with the approach of, let's just keep this nebulous amount of money so that we can figure out what we want to do. Because again, this is our long-range transportation plan. And so, you know, I think with that, on my motion here, I will go ahead and call the question.
Which means now we have to vote now.
Okay.
On the motion.
And so we're going to vote on whether to accept this amendment as is. That's
The main motion. The main motion.
Yeah.
There's no amendment.
All right. Sorry.
The main motion, which is the list here. I believe I need a second. Kevin, if you're listening.
Second.
There was already a second.
Okay,
Kent was the
great.
second.
So we'll need to
To call
Oh,
the
to call the question, sorry.
Right, so we'll need to vote to call the question, which would be a vote to end debate. And then subsequently, we would take up the vote on the main motion.
So.
So we-
Who tallies the votes?
Typically, we ask if there's any objections to the motion. If there are, then we would do a roll call. And you or I could go through each individual and ask how they vote, and then we just keep track of it as part of the record, and then at the end, we figure out if it passed or not.
Are you calling a roll call on the vote to call the question?
Yes, I guess, I don't know how the call to question works, if you, like how that works, Lori, I don't know.
Through the chair, if there are no objections, it's unanimous.
Well,
Call question will be approved. And then you go to the main motion. If there are objections to the main motion, then you do a roll call.
So if there are objections to the call to question, then you would have to do a tally to see who is supportive of it, and if that fails, then you still debate.
So
can we discuss, since we've called the question? I'm unclear.
Call the question is not a debatable motion.
My question was really whether the chair, who's new, understood what call the question means.
yeah. But I think I do. The call to question is we aren't going to discuss the
Correct.
motion anymore.
We're done.
Just vote.
So I can ask if there are any objections to call to question. And I guess what I'm asking is, does anybody have more discussion on the topic?
I'm sorry, I'm going to object to calling the question because I do have more questions. I probably haven't articulated them very well, but I understand the desire to move it ahead, and anyway, I object to calling the question because I'd like a little more discussion. Can the question be called again later?
We may not need that. If this is voted down, we'll just keep discussing it.
Okay,
So then there's an objection, so then you can do roll call on the called question, see how everybody votes, to see if it's down or.
Okay. All right. Sorry about this. I appreciate your patience, but, so we're taking roll call to vote on the call to question. I think I'll start on, online there. Mr. Cross, how do you vote?
Yes.
Dr. Bowen?
Yes.
Apologies if I mispronounced your name, Ms. Pocock.
No.
Mr. Coyce was. And, so I'll vote no as well, sounding like there's more in discussion.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please.
So I guess I would preface by saying that, as I said before, I've been party to these discussions since the late teens. I don't remember when this project actually came about, including discussions about whether Academy Drive, which attaches to the east end of Scooter, how that project should be funded, the impacts on the neighborhood there. I think that's where many of the comments from some of the community councils came from, Rabbit Creek and others. Some of the discussions also were whether the traffic projections for Academy Drive projected at, I think, tens of thousands of cars a day, whether they remained accurate because of the improvements that had been done to the Diamond intersection. They had traffic projections for Academy based on the Scooter project. The Diamond intersection was improved. And there was a belief by many in the community, including assembly members, that the improvements to Diamond had alleviated the need for the Scooter 92nd underpass, vehicle underpass project. So I guess my question is, I don't know if those, maybe that's a question for Mr. Boland, who's in the audience, or for you, Mr. Holland, or where we get the answer, but whether those reevaluations have in fact been done based on the changes that have occurred to the Diamond intersection. And how would DOT's reevaluation of the project incorporate that need? And if they have been done, then how does the public and members of the committee know that reevaluation may not have, in fact, may not already point to a change in the scope of this project? So I guess my overall, this kind of a long soliloquy, my overall discomfort is that that if we leave it at 105, if we rescope it to $40 million with the understanding that DOT is going to take the project and do kind of a reevaluation of it, does that happen with the public process? Where's the opportunity for consideration of the community council comments and other things that have led Mr. Boland to bring this motion to the table? I want to make sure that if we walk away voting yes on something today, that everybody knows what the end product is going to be. And if the starting point of the end product is that the vehicle underpass is a vital component, then I don't think that achieves the goal that Mr. Boland had in mind, bringing this motion and representing the interest of the community. So I'm struggling with, frankly, I'm struggling with the idea of voting to change the scope of a DOT project on a wholesale basis. But I'm also struggling with the concept of voting to allow the project to remain as it is because of the significant interest of the community, which is why I asked if there was an opportunity for follow-up meeting on this.
I guess I have a question as to whether the Academy project is included in the MTP. It is.
It is, because it's currently programmed in the TIP, I think, to get started next year.
And is it appropriate for me to refer to Luke to help us out with that question? Do you have any information on that, Luke?
I do, yeah.
Mr. Boland?
Yeah, thanks, Luke Boland, DOT, construction engineer. In terms of our path forward on this project, and some of the concerns raised by Assemblymember Boland, there was a letter issued that we are reevaluating the scope of this project, and that we are looking at deferring the construction piece to 2027. One of the benefits to that timeframe is that it could align with the Academy Vanguard and the scope of that project to address some of those concerns that community members have had on how this may impact traffic near a neighborhood. We've also had some discussions with community council members, legislators, folks in the community. We've got a ton of input on this. We're in the process of compiling that information and looking at the scope. There's some other things that have changed in this area. We've relatively recently completed some projects on O'Malley and how that may impact some of the data as traffic equalizes after completion of those projects. And I guess the approach moving forward is to compile that information and then put out public outreach that shows this is what we've heard. These are some of the things that I think address the comments and concerns from the community and how the project may advance. So when we're talking about rescoping this project, we're talking about a big public outreach effort to show what we can change and maybe some other things that if we can't change it, why can't we change it? Where's that data driven? How we recommend.
Thanks, Luke.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Boland. So the last number I heard for the Academy project was in the $23 to $25 million range. So that just begs another question in my mind. If that project is planned to proceed, presumably if the vehicle underpass project was dropped, if it was rescoped and there was no vehicle underpass, then Mr. Boland prepared this or presented these options that were presented by Ms. Huber last year, 3 different options. At least 2 of these options may not require a reconstruction of Academy Drive. So now we have the horse and the cart, or the cart and the horse. And so now we're talking about not 105 million, but we're talking about $130 million. And if the underpass project were descoped, that might free up more than the 70 or so that Mr. Boland estimated. It could free up the other 25 for Academy, because Academy presumably would not be needed if some iteration of a pedestrian underpass was implemented instead of a vehicle underpass. So that's all to say, I remain thoroughly confused as to the best path forward today. I will say that, I've said it a couple times now, I have heard the same concerns that Mr. Vollenberg has heard, and the strong pushback from the community, and frankly, some concerns from the previous administration about the project. So I'm not sure exactly how to proceed right now.
Can I add one more nuance? So even on concept number 2, which again gives an estimated cost of 27 million plus or minus. It was pointed out in this during this presentation that the roundabout to the west may not even be needed for the pedestrian connectivity. So even within this concept number 2, and again, you know, I'm not sure how much thorough analysis went into this presentation or these concepts. And I say that because I think that was sort of self-admitted by the presenter. But if you don't need that roundabout to the west, I still think there's a lot of wiggle room within this concept for a configuration of a non-motorized crossing. And so even at 30 million that I'm proposing, I think that covers all 3 of these alternatives. And I would just argue that if DOT disagrees and said, you know, there still is a need for the 2 lanes, or there still is a need for XYZ scope at 40, they should do the reevaluation. We were told that you were going to do a reevaluation. And so my question is, why hasn't that been done yet? Because one of the assembly, one of 4, called for a reanalysis of the purpose and need. And we were told, again, by Ms. Hubert, that was going to be done. It was not. And I followed up on it. And so now I think it's kind of like, we're late at the game. We're supposed to be approving the MTP, and we still don't know how we're going to rescope this. So I'm offering specific language and trying to make other projects happen that I think the community does support moving forward. And I think it's on DOT to come back at a later date when you have completed a reevaluation and have a proposed scope, and to amend the MTP. That's what I would offer up. And I guess I hope that we can be responsive to the community's concern and to what other elected officials have supported in the interim.
And so there is a design that's ready to bid. Like I mentioned there, I feel like there's many elements in here that that the people that commented, based on the nature of their comments, I would say that if they knew that was in the scope, that might have changed their comment to some extent, and that's presumption. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it seems like there's a desire for non-motorized safety improvements, and there are some elements that certainly do that. I'd say that all those elements do that to some extent, but if we're going to phase that and do the work on Brayton and do the work at Diamond, and hopefully do something at O'Malley, as Luke mentioned, maybe some of the changes that we made uphill will change some of those accident counts there, but yeah, we have a design that's ready to go, that we could build part of those elements that or part of that project that I think would have a lot of value to the people that are making this.
Possibly, I will just say, I don't think that it's just a desire for non-motorized elements that is driving the objection. I think it's also the emptying of traffic into a lower income neighborhood. I think it's the removal of soccer fields, recreational opportunities for kids as part of the right of way for that project. So I think the community has been very clear about what they would like to see. That's a non-motorized only crossing. And that's why I'm bringing this forward.
And I guess, and then, concept level, I would say that we're looking at 2050. Most of the projects in this plan are concept level, so that's exactly what this is. And the costs are certainly concept. So
I appreciate that.
Mr. Sheriff,
Please.
May I ask a question of Mr. Young and Noah? Please. This is a procedural question, not a procedural question for the body, but what is the ability or the latitude of the policy committee to significantly modify the scope of a project that's on the policy committee? I've heard and I recall discussions that the policy committee can add projects or remove projects. Can a project be significantly rescoped in the opinion of the AMATS coordinator?
This gets into a really tricky topic because, it's clear we can add or delete. The rescoping of a project that's not an AMATS funded project is always kind of in a gray area. FHW and FTA say that AMATS is responsible for all transportation projects that are federally funded or non-federally regionally significant projects in our NPO boundary. They also hold us accountable for all those projects. And they say that anything in the TIP or the MTP is up to the policy committee's authority on what to do. So my understanding is the policy committee can do whatever it wants as long as it's legally allowable. So, there's some illegal things you can't do, but let's not focus on that. However, when you then send the MTP forward for approval by FHWA and FTA, they will say, did you make this change based on a cooperative discussion between the different parties? And I think what we're doing here today is part of that cooperative discussion. There's no federal guidelines of here's the exact cooperative speak on things that you have to do regarding the MTP. So yes, you can make changes to the description. However, it is a DOT project. It is DOT funding. And if DOT does not like the description that's changed or like the change to the project, they do not have to implement the project as changed. I don't know what limitations there are on whether they can just wholesale do whatever they want, because there's so much emphasis placed on what is in the MTP, what is in the TIP, and then what is in the STIP. So, it would be kind of a new territory we've never explored before. I don't unfortunately have a lot of answers for you on that. I apologize.
And I have a lot of talking points from the funding perspective, which they're relevant, but I don't think they're that relevant. I don't think we want to build a project that doesn't serve the purpose and need, regardless of whether we had to pay money back. So I'm not even going to bring that part up, even though I just did a little bit. But and then also, there's no guarantee that if we chop $75 million out of this STIP project, that it goes to the other projects. Again, I don't know that that's all that relevant. It turns into now we're looking at priorities for the state. We're talking concept level here again for the plan. So it has some relevance, but in my mind, it's not a huge relevance.
It sounds like there is a commitment from DOT that there will be a re-examining of the purpose and need, and that information will be available. We'll go through a public process and will be available to the public and to AMAT before anything goes forward related to a vehicular underpass.
Absolutely.
Which is sounds like the question. So there's more information on the horizon that would inform.
Yes. And as far as a commitment that was made to do that work, it's not, I don't know when that commitment was made. And like I said, it's underway and I can't even put a timeline on that. I don't know the details of the project. I don't know how long that would take. But, I think the first step is using the updated AMATS model, which I think is complete, but recently complete. Yes. And using that as a basis for making our projections. So yes, I commit to you that we will reevaluate that project. Today, I can't give you a timeline. But we'll keep you posted, certainly. When I know, I will let.
Mr. Chair, if I may, a question for, I guess for DOT at large. I believe you mentioned earlier in your comments that you use a number of 40 million as opposed to 105 million. Is there a path forward for us as a group to is there an amendment to the motion that could arrive at that number for the scope of work for the reconfigured, reimagined O'Malley project?
I think there is, again, mostly because it's concept level, what can we build for, whatever it is. I don't think we know the answer to that yet. But there's some things like the underpass, or if it's a vehicular underpass, that I think we can push that work. If it's warranted, to a later scope.
I mean, so I think what I'm hearing is that DOT would prefer to keep the existing project description language that is amenable to reducing the program funding to $40 million. I mean, I still feel like it's DOT's burden of proof. If there are other portions of the project that are still relevant or still have merit, I think that's a future amendment to the MTP. That's just my personal perspective. Now, if the will of the body is going to be that we do the former, I'm going to vote in support of that. But I still think it's going to be important to prioritize these other projects. And to Mr. Holland's point about these are concept level, I think Gamble and Ingram are concept level. And I think when we've seen previous concepts from highway to highway, you've seen a cut and cover, right? What's that going to cost? A whole lot more than 80 million. And so that's why I say I want to see realistic program funding for Gamble and Ingram. And I think it is one of the most pressing needs. And I will say, I think it is a stellar example of DOT's willingness to work with the community, particularly with bringing on the new project manager, Galen Jones, who I think is doing a fantastic job, has really shown a willingness to work with the folks who are involved in the Reconnecting Fairview project. Did this really cool novel study where they put cameras all up and down the corridor, Gamble, Ingram, and Hyder, to capture collisions at the intersections and also near misses, and also capturing the mid-block crossings and activity, not just conflict points or the intersections. So I guess if that's the amendment that someone's going to bring forward, is that we keep the same project language and reduce the funding begrudgingly, I think I could support that so long as these other projects are prioritized and programmed as well. And we could make the corresponding reductions, I guess, to reach that $10 million delta. We could make those reductions from the Ingram and Gamble. And I guess, again, that for me is a pretty big compromise.
So that's more in line with what the
The TAC recommended no change, surprisingly, to the Diamond O'Malley, which I just think is what they did.
Sorry, clarification. They did actually recommend change to it. So they recommended that they reduce the cost of the Diamond O'Malley interchange down to fund the Glen Highway Pathway Connection at Artillery Road and the Track J project.
Okay, so this is not in that bolded.
So it's in the paragraph right above about what the technical advisory committee did, and they did, there is a section in there that they recommended reducing the cost of that project to fund the other things.
Okay.
I think I understand where we're at. So are we ready to call this motion to question?
Well, I think somebody may be interested in amending.
I think I have an amendment. I have one more procedural question for Mr. Young to know, if I may. How specific does a project need to be? So for example, if an amendment were made to reduce the funding for the O'Malley to Diamond project to some amount, is there an opportunity for the policy committee to recommend to DOT that they go back and do the rescoping so that rescoping effort is captured in the record?
Yes, they can. And you can state that as part of like the stipulation of the approval is that DOT is committing to redoing that evaluation and providing that information to the policy committee when it is done for further discussion.
Do I want to make a motion for?
The chair, can I,
Please.
real quick, I'm sorry to bring it up, but in the memo here, there was the changes section where there's recommended project description changes. You know, I asked that you take a look at those because a lot of those are responding to the public, asking for more information to be added to project descriptions in the MTP to help address some of the concerns they have with like noise and environmental impacts or active transportation. And that change was brought forward as a recommendation for approval from the Technical Advisory Committee, so that can be carried forward. Because what happens often is the public will comment on a project description. We have these kind of generic descriptions in the MTP, and some of these items get lost. So the recommendation was to carry a lot of that forward into the project description, so it's not lost. So if you're open to it, I'd ask you maybe look at the changes section of the memo and see if any of those could be amended, because they're not cost changes, they're project description changes that are easy for us to do and kind of carry a lot of that information forward. So, thank you.
Should we address the first?
Yeah, I'll like to make a motion to amend. Take some wordsmithing here, but I would move to amend Mr. Boland's motion to read under item 1, amend the project description to read that Alaska Department of Transportation will evaluate the scope of the project based on community and local government comments that have been made about the viability of the project. That's the viability of the project, given the numerous public comments that have been received. And that it reduced program funding from $105 million to $40 million. Number 2 would remain the same. Number 3 would remain the same. I would move to strike item 4, given that that is a local street owned by the municipality. And I would amend item 5 to increase the funding by $15.2 million and amend item 6 to increase the funding by $15.2 million.
Second.
I'm going to open that to a vote. Mr. Cross, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Colhaise's amendment to the motion. Also, Ms. O'Connor, how do you vote?
I mean, amended motion, yeah.
Yes. Dr. Bowen,
Yes.
Mr. Colhaise.
Yes.
I'll vote yes.
That passes.
And then if it's okay, I'll make a second motion. Which is to incorporate from the memo, items 1 through 4 under change, the suggested changes. So not the additions or deletions, but the changes. Because my understanding that is that this is, well, actually, I'll wait for a second.
Second.
So I think what I'm understanding from AMAT staff is that these are responsive to public support, public comments, but do not impact financial constraints. Fiscal.
Correct.
So we have a motion to include these changes. We have a second, so we move to vote. It is appropriate for me to say, are there any objections?
That's correct. You can do that.
Are there any objections? Hearing none. Incorporate that amendment. Gonna need a little help catching up. There, read something back to us, Aaron, or-
So we have the amendment 1. Which was change project description to read DOT and PF will evaluate the scope of the project based on community and local government comments made about the viability of the project, given the numerous public comments received, and reduce program funding from 105 million to 40 million. Leave number 2 the same, leave number 3 the same, strike number 4. And then number 5, reduce it from 20 million addition, 20.2, sorry, to 15.2. And then number 6 is the same, reduce it from 20 million to 15.2, 20.2 to 15.2. And then amendment number 2 is incorporate the changes only 1 through 4 in the memo.
Can I ask a quick question to clarify my understanding of that first amendment? It was that that 40 million is to include sort of the current project description with that language added on about the evaluation of the project, correct?
That's my understanding. Yeah. That's my understanding.
Okay. Sorry, we'll say change, add to current project description to read the following.
I think that's
Addition.
what
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Apologize, I'm struggling a little bit, but how does that deal with the memo that was before us to begin with?
Are there still other recommended changes from the act that we haven't addressed yet?
Yes.
Yes, but I think Kevin Cross has a question if you would like to.
Actually,
Yeah, please.
I have a motion. I have a motion when you guys get caught up.
His motion might address. There are a few changes that were recommended by the technical advisory committee about the deleting another project, a couple of things here, sorry. Port of Alaska Track J Access Road project was one they recommended adding. And then they recommended deleting a project, the Rabbit Creek Road Girdwood PEL study. Because there's kind of overlapping issues with that PEL. Staff didn't really know what to do because there's the current approved STIP, then there's the draft STIP. One of them has the PEL in it, the other doesn't have it in there, so we included it in there to be safe, and the TAC is recommending that PEL be removed since there is a Seward Highway project currently underway for that portion.
So, and again, trying to understand where we're at, because we've addressed some of the changes that AMET's recommended. We have some that we haven't addressed. So we'll address the changes, recommended changes that weren't addressed by the initial motion as amended.
It's up to you if you guys want to or not, but those are the only things that are left. The only things we're actually going to address at this point are what you have approved as part of your amendments.
Okay. So I think,
Maybe this will help. We've had 2 motions that have passed.
Yeah.
One has amended. And then we have this memo with recommendations. So it's up to any member of the policy committee if they want to make further motions on this agenda item, or we could move on to the next agenda item.
Just to clarify, it's all amendments at this point. We have the main motion, and then we have 2 amendments that have been made so far to that main motion. And
Have we
so
voted on the main?
Could you make a?
you haven't voted on the main motion. No, you can't make a separate motion. That's kind of the thing. You have your one motion, and if you vote on that one motion, you're done with the action item. So you have to make amendments to that motion. And so far, they've both been amendments.
So interesting.
So if you want to make any other changes, you'll need to do them as amendments. And then you finish voting on all the amendments, then you vote on the main motion itself with all the amended changes.
And if I may, the main motion you're referring to is Dr. Boland's
Yes.
initial motion. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
So interesting. So I just want to clarify this,
Yeah.
so I know going forward for our meetings. So each action item can only have one main motion associated.
Yes. Because you've taken action on that item and you can't take any more because you've done it. So that's why everything's done as amendments.
So we should have moved first to adopt and then amended with.
That's fine. I mean, I think how Dr. Voland did it as, sorry, Member Voland, it got me saying that now. It did it is fine, because it's clear enough for us to know that this was the original intent. And these are the amendments that are done, and then when the final one is, we can kind of go back through what, if there are any additional amendments to clarify, make sure everything's good. But I think Mr. Cross might have had an amendment.
Mr.
I do.
Cross.
And I emailed this off to you, Dan, and you, Aaron, when we began this meeting. And so I have 3 amendments. We'll just do them one at a time, just so that we can discuss each one. The first is meant to the addition of, it's basically
suggest-
add the.
Kevin, sorry,
sorry.
I hate to cut you off, but I have a point of order.
Sure.
This is getting a little clunky, I think, because we didn't realize you can only have one motion. And so, in fact, what we did is we actually voted to approve an amended motion.
You haven't voted on the main motion yet.
I think we have.
No,
No?
you've only done the amendments.
Oh, good. Okay, then I'm good.
Yeah.
Never mind. Take it away, Kevin.
Yeah, amendments are fine. That's where we're at right now, is making amendments to the main motion.
Woo.
No problem. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan. Good clarification. So my first amendment would be the addition. So what I'm doing is my intention here is to fractionalize the Glen Highway pathway into some smaller manageable bites of things that are important. So amendment number 1 is adding Glen Highway pathway back, but reducing the scope of this work strictly from connecting from Paradise Lane to Thunderbird. This is a 1.5 mile section that connects from Mirror Lake to the village of Eklutna and Thunderbird Falls. It's the last little leg. It's part of the overall Glen Highway pathway project, 21 million, but it's actually a very small 1.5 miles that connects that whole neighborhood up in there with the rest of Chugiak Eagle River that's separated. So adding that one, that's my first amendment, adding that one back in. Do I need a second?
Yes.
Well, I will second for purposes of discussion.
Excellent. What would you like to discuss?
They're already in there. No, so
Oh, no, not the change. I got.
could you restate your motion, Kevin?
Yeah, my reinstatement is to add from, it's basically under the additions project NMO 198, the Glen Highway pathway, which was extending up to Kinnick River Bridge, is basically taking that and reducing it to just connecting from Paradise Lane. That is on the north side. That's by Edmonds Lake, just north of Mirror Lake, and connecting that trail to the trail in Thunderbird Falls. That would create a non-motorized pathway from all of the north area, Eklutna River, Eklutna Valley, that whole neighborhood with the rest of Chugiak Eagle River. It's a 1.5 mile section, rather than a $21 million project or a $22 million project, fractioning out that small connectivity. We've, as stated earlier, there's already been some money associated with, there's already doing studies to try to create to resolve some of those connectivity issues, but that would be making sure that that stays in the plan.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Please.
So I guess what I would be curious about would be a proposed amount. I don't think I heard you say an amount. And then again, with our fiscal constraint, where you propose that come from, what would you remove or reduce elsewhere in the MTP?
Okay. My screen's frozen. Well, I guess we can go back and take a look at how was there a reduction on some of the lane changes to the old Glen Highway? Hold on just 1 second. Let me go through my notes. Thunderbird Glen Highway Paradise to amend. So. Yeah, I would say some of those funds, we should be using that from the funds that have been directed towards the old Glen Highway changes. I mean, to me, this seems like it's it fits in with the pedestrian calming measures on the old Glen. And I would say about $1 million.
Please, Kelsey.
If I may, so the way our financial analysis is set up is that all non-motorized projects are under one revenue stream. So you would only be able to take and add non-motorized projects. You can't sort of cross-pollinate between the complete streets list. I do believe this project was scored, the change that you're suggesting was scored. I'm not positive if it's the appropriate distance because the cost estimate that we have for it is 10 million for Paradise Lane and Thunderbird Falls exit. But it also says separated grade crossing, so I'm not sure if that included an overcrossing over the highway, which might be the reason why it's $10 million.
Yeah,
So
I
I
don't
just
think
want-
it's stored and I don't think there's a grade crossing. So this is, you know, on the east side of the highway, right next to it. So running right up next to the highway. It said, what did I get someone, they scored a 6. You know, the individual I've been working with on this, or the individual I've been speaking with is Will Tagan. Am I permitted to reference an individual that's, I've been working with on this particular amendment? Can I ask them to speak to this a little bit?
Yes.
Hey, Will, if you're still online, could you've done the research with this, and we were discussing this earlier, since you were spearheading that through the Chuyak Community Councils and through the advisory board. Would you mind kicking in?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah. Your
Oh,
name
good.
correct.
My camera is not popping on here, but Will Tagan, Kugiak resident. Yeah, so this was a good question about the fiscal constraints, and you know, I would look to some of the DOT for recommendations on where that would come from. In my opinion, you know, looking at the scope and the size of many of these projects, if we're looking at like a $2 million, I was thinking it would be about a $2 million project. It seems like that's a pretty small amount. And I can't actually see the bottom of the removals here, but there were some recommended removals on the that came on the recommended memo, and those are the ones that I would look to first. So I don't know which projects you know, to pull, honestly. However, I feel like this is such a small section of trail, it should be fairly straightforward if there's a recommendation made by the committee for DOT to do that work. I don't know if that's super helpful or not.
I guess we're just looking for suggestions where we can do this small connectivity in order to tie in the northern part of Anchorage into the rest of the city.
I mean, we've moved some money around today. You know, the interesting thing with this is a section of the old Glen that was paved over by the new Glen, which is why it's a problem. You know, the rest of the connection all the way from Eagle River out to Mirror Lake, you can follow the frontage roads, but the road the road is paved over for this half mile. I mean, you theoretically could just connect the half mile, but it makes more sense to go from exit to exit, which is about 1.5 miles.
And I guess to Chelsea's point, that funding has to come out of a certain pot. So I guess in my mind, that we would take a look at the list and maybe lower scoring projects would be the ones that we may target to scope or.
So just for clarification, so in the tip right now, we have a portion of the Glen Highway pathway that we're extending. It's about 1/2 mile and it's $6 million for that portion. So if you're looking at 1.5 miles, it's going to be 3 times the amount that we have in there, roughly. So it could be about 18 million or so to do the project. 10 million, you know, might be one of those things that we can look around, but it's definitely going to cost more than people think.
Yeah.
With federal funding.
So I'll just say, I appreciate the idea, definitely interested to explore that possibility in the future. I think at this point, apologies to my colleague, Member Cross. I think I'm gonna oppose the motion just because I don't really see there's any options to deprogram in the non-motorized list. specifically that would justify moving this one forward.
All right, thank you. If I may, I just had two other, and you guys can, we can, for the purposes of discussion. We
Real
have,
quick. Sorry,
Yeah, we have-
Mr. Cross, to vote on your amendment, on this first amendment. We need to vote on it, what the action of the committee is before we move on to any further amendments.
Does there need to be, there's a motion, does there need to be a second to that motion?
So it already received the motion and already received the second, so then we just need to know what the will of the committee is.
Okay,
at
the
this
second
point.
was.
Yes, second was Dr. Bone, Mr. Bone, member Bone.
Okay, so we're voting. Um, How do you vote? Mr. Roll?
I sadly vote no.
Ms. O'Connor?
No.
Mr. Colhase?
No.
Mr. Cross?
yes,
Yeah.
why not? So, moving on quickly for out of the interest of time, there were two others here that are separate projects, but I want to make sure they're kind of combined in efforts and for the purpose of the discussion, maybe you guys can help me. Where we've got, go ahead.
Please. Sorry, just give us 1 minute. I'm sorry.
I guess it's a point of order. Are we time constrained? I'm time constrained. There's a meeting in this room at 3:30. I just want to bring that on the record, and I don't know if there's an opportunity to extend, but we're bumping up against it. Thank you.
Yeah, we have about 12 minutes left of the meeting, so just kind of recognize that if we're gonna do more motions. Oh, yeah, Mr. Holland, how do you vote on the motion, the amendment?
I think it's a little moot, but I'll vote no.
We just need it in the record. Thank you.
Aaron, do we need to get to the second action item? Don't we have another thing on the?
No, we only have one action item. We still need to make sure that we vote on the main motion as amended.
Okay.
So we need to leave time for that. There is an informational item that from transit. They asked to be on this agenda. It'd take just a few minutes. So if there is time available, we can do that, but we'll try and be acknowledging the time.
We have to add items that we haven't discussed from the original memo to the existing, the initial motion. If you want to.
Yes.
As an amendment, yes, if you want to discuss it and vote on it.
Feeling like we aren't gonna get all the way through there today.
We have to.
Okay.
So,
Well, I did interrupt Mr. Cross, so please.
I just had a question regarding the Eagle River Road improvements that are scheduled through the TIP for 2025. I believe that's when they start. Do we know if those include a non-motorized or a multi-use pathway? I just needed clarification on that, because if it does, I wanted to make sure that was included or amended to make sure their scope of work included that. That is a very dangerous road, 55 miles per hour. It's used continually by people, public. On a day like this, I can go there and see 3 or 4 people walking down the side of a road with no shoulder and guardrail on icy roads. But do we know if that project included? And I said, oh, we just voted on this one, so we're good. Okay. Nope, I'm withdrawn. Thank you. I'm so glad I have an assistant in the background sending me text messages and notes. So no further questions. Thank you.
there's no amendment. No amendment.
So where are we at? Would anybody like to add any of these recommended changes from the DAC to the motion?
Mr. Chair, if we move any of these, do we need to solve the fiscal constraint issue?
I guess depends on.
May I ask Mr. Henry all the questions?
I apologize.
If we add any of these or remove any of these as recommended by the TAC, do we have to adjust fiscal constraint in the MTP overall?
It depends on which thing you are changing. If you're adding a brand new project, yes, that will impact a fiscal constraint. If you're deleting a project, that will leave funding available that you can then do something.
Can I ask a question? There is a recommended removal from the TAC about the Seward Highway, Rabbit Creek Road, the Girdwood Bell study for $3 million. Is the planning money, is that similar to the non-motorized money where you have to substitute plan for plan, or where could that be removed?
That's DOT funding and for the purposes of the financial analysis to not incredibly overcomplicate things, the plans all fell within the complete streets list.
So I think what I understand is that if we were to remove that, that could potentially unlock something else on the, just on the complete streets list.
Under DOT.
Under DOT.
But not guaranteed it's used there, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, that's always the risk.
Sure. Any motions on any of these projects? I think I hand off the gavel, but I would make a movement to make that move. It's a redundant exercise. Can I do that?
If he hands the gavel over,
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Motion to make the changes recommended by the TAC that we haven't already adopted, the additions and deletion or additions and removals that they recommended. I'll make that motion.
Condas, do I hear a second? I don't hear a second. So I guess we don't.
Motion dies.
Okay, motion dies. So need vote on the initial motion. Is that the next step?
the main motion as amended, yes.
Same motion as amended. Is there any value in reading through that again, so everybody understands where we're at? Are you ready to vote?
I think I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Well, let's put it to vote. And I gotta find buried my list here, but Dr. Bowman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Boca?
Yeah.
Mr. Coles?
Yes.
And Mr. Cross, how do you vote?
Yes. Yes.
I'll vote yes as well.
Thank you all. That was the battle.
That's it.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I we're no, we're not done, but I do want to thank the body for patience with me as I deferred the call of the question because I had some more questions to be answered in my own mind. So thank you all.
I think we answered that at the question as well.
So yes, yeah, I think we're probably not gonna be able to get to the rest of the agenda. So what's the next?
So there's only an informational item and Jamie Acton can speak on this, and I think she can do it in just a minute or two. If Jamie is interested and if you're willing to indulge us to get it done.
So it's, if Jamie's willing, let's move on to that topic.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Jamie Acton, Public Transportation Department Director. I'm just bringing an information item to you tonight or this afternoon, sorry. This document is federally required. It's called the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. We lovingly refer to it as PTASP. It is an annual plan that is required now from FTA for anybody that is receiving urbanized area formula funds. We are the direct recipient of multiple pots of funding from the FTA, so therefore we are required to do this. Essentially, PTASP provides a framework for safety. And it's basically designating an accountable executive, a safety officer, agency leadership, and key staff. There's a number of metrics that are involved in this plan that are updated annually. This document will go to the Assembly for approval ultimately. And our changes to the document from 2022 to 2023 were very minor. A lot of formatting things and stuff like that, not actually meat of the document or even changes to much of the data that is in the document. One of the things that I will note is that this year we had our FTA triennial review, which is a 3-year audit that FTA comes in and does. And the PTASP plan was part of that review. And FTA said that our plan looked great and that there were no actions associated with that, no need to change anything and no need for any findings or anything like that. So we're in good standing with FTA based on this this plan. And just wanted to bring that to your attention before it showed up in front of the assembly. So any questions for me?
Questions from the committee? Hearing none, are there any questions from the public? Not seeing none.
Great, thank you.
You. Are there any further project plan updates? No.
Nothing, thank you.
Okay, so we can move on to agenda number 7. Agenda item number 7 is general information. It doesn't look like there are any items there, so I think we can move on to agenda number 8. Agenda number 8 is committee comments. Does the committee have any comments to add today?
I will just say thank you, the committee, the rest of the committee for a robust discussion. I'm happy we landed where we did, and I think that this will hopefully be a good ongoing dialogue. And I'll just say, great job, Mr. Holland, on sharing your first.
Well, thank you. Anybody else have any comments? And I guess I'll reiterate that I feel like that's a good compromise, and you brought up some good points there, and we do need to do some heavier public involvement on the project, so thank you for that. Agenda number 9, public comments. Do I have any public comments? Not seeing any. So I think we can move on to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
There's a motion and a second. Are there any objections? Hearing none. Adjourn.
Thank you all very much.